Welcome to The Business Strategist, the show for CEOs and founders ready to scale fast, lead smarter, and build a business that doesn't rely on them. I'm Adam Strong, award-winning strategist, former elite athlete, international speaker, and 3 times best-selling author. After 3 decades in business, I know exactly what it takes to grow, scale, and exit with impact. Each week, I dive into real conversations with industry experts, bold entrepreneurs, and clients navigating the uphill struggles of business, giving you the tools, the strategies to create more profit, more freedom, and more impact. Let's get into it. Are you planning to sell your business in the next 3 to 5 years? Then you already know it's not just about finding a buyer, it's about actually protecting what you've actually built. That's where our sponsor, Adam Benedict, comes in. They're one of the leading premier M&A legal firms trusted by founders to simplify complex exits, protect value, and deliver results. Now, if you want a smart, smoother, and strategic exit, visit adambenedict.co.uk.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
Google, Maersk, Diageo, huge brands in the industry. But what if you could learn some scale-up strategies and learn about transformational change from one of the most executive advisors in the game? We have the amazing Louisa Loran here. Louisa is a strategic business transformation specialist, and she's worked with some of the biggest brands. She's got over 20 years of experience, and she's got a great book coming out, which is called Leadership in Motion. And the reason I reached out to Louisa actually is that with her forthcoming book that's coming out, we share a very good friend of ours, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith. Me and Marshall are very good friends. And for you guys that are who are avid listeners of the podcast, Marshall is the number 1 executive coach in the world, an absolute godfather when it comes to leadership. And when I saw his endorsement of Louisa's book, I thought, okay, we clearly need to have a conversation here. So what are we going to be covering today with regards to her time in Google, in Maersk, and in Diageo? But more importantly, how you can apply some of the scaling strategies that she has taught in those companies and what she's picked up in terms of common patterns, some of the advantages, some of the disadvantages, just to mention a few. So without further ado, Louisa, welcome to the show.
Lovely to be here, Adam.
Lovely to have you here as well. You know, very interesting background that you have. And, you know, we were speaking about it offline, because give us some context, because I know that a lot of the guests that often come on to the show are generally very entrepreneurial. They're experts in the right frame of mind. But more importantly, you've been more of an intrapreneur more than an entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit more about your background and now turn into the kind of the entrepreneur. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, no, of course. I will say it's one of those stories when you explain to people what you've done, they're like, well, how did you go from some of the world's highest end lifestyle products with Moet Hennessy in the world of alcoholics with Diageo into Maersk, the world's largest shipping giant, and then into Google? But for me, it's the same behaviors that actually intrigue me to stand on my own 2 feet now, because I think across all of this, it's about genuinely just being curious about what's the next thing that people are interested about, whether it's a technology change or a brand demand or whatever it may be. And then once you've seen that potential, not just letting it be a pie in the sky or a dream, but structurally going after it, understanding what it takes. Does it require repositioning? Does it require restructuring? Does it require acquisition of new products and capabilities? And then probably last but not least, third thing I've done throughout this career is I have seen the power of finding courage and instilling courage within leaders so they can go after it. Throughout all of these decisions, I've chosen what has exposed me to most learnings. But what has meant that I could then move on is that there have been strong leaders who could carry it forward. And I think that's really what I found so interesting of how do you come in, how do you interject, how do you accelerate someone else's journey and then move on. So it did seem natural to me that when you've been in consumer products, when you've been in large operations and you've been in tech, the fourth chapter was not finding a fourth industry or fourth angle. It was actually sharing those insights wider in just a different format.
I think what's really interesting here is that I think, again, I'm just thinking out loud for someone that's had such an extensive and successful corporate career. I guess the ideology of, it's interesting what you were saying there, like the fourth pillar for you was teach what you currently learn from your experiences, which I believe is great. But I also believe that 99% of people would probably go and find the next corporate gig. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah. And trust me, I have a lot of people there like, when's the next corporate gig? And I said, well, I have no plans for that. I'm not going to say never, but right now I'm deeply committed to sharing those learnings because I'm seeing the value. I am seeing how the things that I learned in huge boardrooms, in huge organizations with huge teams are just as applicable for small businesses. I have seen how the ability to be clear on your current position, the future potential, move into those spaces does not matter whether you are 100,000 or 1,000. In fact, when you are 100,000, chances are once you found it, there's still a lot of confusion within your organization and your partners. So there's definitely some common themes. And then there's also an ability to actually apply it faster, more with more conviction and in a more agile way. I'm not saying that smaller is always better, and we can talk more about that, but there is some purity in that lens.
Tell us a little bit about your role within these big corporations, if you want to call it that. What was you drafted in to do, and what was the result that you were trying to create for them? What was the problem they were trying to solve?
I think I'm the type of person, if I had a job profile, I would say, fine, that's the floor. I will for sure deliver whatever you put on that piece of paper or document, but I'm not going to see it as walls nor as limitations. I would always come in and say, how do I actually understand where this company has potential to go? And how do I align with the highest decision makers within the company? And then contribute to a wider sense than that. That, of course, has been built up over years of engagements with colleagues. And I remember the first time when I was I was my mid-20s. At that point in time, I was with Diageo. I was responsible for digital and brand engagement for Johnnie Walker, the most profitable brand in the portfolio. And I can say digital at that point in time was like, wow, we were one of the first brands to go on multiple Facebook pages. It's a different world. But nonetheless, the point was I was part of the team. I was a junior member. My boss was a very well-respected brand communication leader, yet from a different generation. So his great thinking, great work was not cutting through with the audiences that we needed to reach. There was a meeting. I sat in the back, typical, like lots of people, important people in the front, smaller people in the back. And our CMO looked over to our brand director and said, you have the most profitable brand. You have 3 months till launch. You've spent a fortune on media. You have no content. What are you going to do? And he had not prepared me for this, but he just looked up and he says, I'm going to give it to Louisa. And I was like, I almost dropped everything I was holding because I was like, what did he just say? But my point with this story was, of course, having let's say, continuously showing that you can do more, still be accountable and responsible for your task, has led me to get many of those chances throughout my career. So it was not about the task I was given. It was the task that I helped contribute to and show that was possible. And I have had many of those throughout my career, great leaders who have shown potential, shown support and backed me in decisions early on. And I think therefore also, so let's say just to elaborate, in Diageo, it was a lot about marketing, innovation, commercial roles. I moved to Maersk, where it was first also marketing, brand insights, sustainability. And then because those were so complementary skills in that company, when there was a need for a strategy change and a opportunity to look at where value existed in the market, my skills became very handy. And I suddenly became the person who was part of a core team to rewrite the strategy of this conglomerate that actually serves 20% of the global logistics market. So it was a skill complement that then moved into a role and moved on to wider business development. So from a, let's say, adjacent capability in a business, the skills and the attitude positioned me very much at the heart of this transformation for 100,000 people. And so once again, it was not a set rule. After having defined a change at that level and everything that comes along with that, acquisitions, repositioning, a lot of changes of capabilities, and therefore also people, a lot of culture change.
Mm.
When it was then time for me to move on and I looked to Google, I came into a role doing product solutions, so solutions to solve supply chain problems.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, of course, you come in and you learn, you're respectful of the culture, but also the products that you step into, which, as you can imagine, were quite different from what I came from. But with my background, it was not just about building that product or that solution. It was bridging between the traditional industries and the tech developers, which over time, again, led me to lead an industry and ended up doing strategic business transformation across all industries at Google. So I know that was a very long answer, but I think the theme is really that, where you say, okay, I take a task that I know I can bring, but then I take responsibilities from growing from there. And I think this is actually quite similar as what many smaller companies do. They don't sit around and pass over a paper to someone who has another role, because we are all responsible for everyone and everything in small companies. And I think that skill set is valuable whether you are in a big or small company. And I think there are people that, I don't know whether it's laziness or comfort in boundaries, that neglect that when the company gets larger, and there's no reason for.
When you went into these large organizations, because it sounds to me as if you kind of went in as a kind of a strategic advisor, right, to try to drive the company forward. That's kind of how I see it as. I might be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But with these large companies, which are highly complex, lots of different components, lots of moving parts to it, where does one start? Do you kind of identify stressors in the business? Do you identify certain improvements that need to be made, and then you kind of go, you aim at that particular area? How does it work?
Well, I think that one of the things that's important for me is, of course, as I said, you need to be able to deliver whatever functional capabilities were expected of you coming in as a bare minimum.
Sure.
However, the transformation and the growth very often for me comes from just understanding, where do you make money today and where do you intend on making money in the future?
Right. Interesting question.
And I think this, where do you intend on making money in the future? I'm surprised how few people actually spend time on that. They're like, I just need to get through today. Yeah, I understand that. But how do you get to a business where it is actually automatically scalable? Are your users helping you scale? Or is this going to be a transactional business forever? Because if you answer that question of where you're going to make money in the future, then you start to see potential for partnerships. You start to see potential for, let's say, also limitations to your passion. It's more a sense of direction.
I like that.
That's also where I would start. And of course, if you are in a very traditional business, like when I was with Moët Hennessy, how you're going to make money in the future is you're going to keep it exclusive. That's one of the most important things, right? Whereas if you are in Google, how will you make money in the future? You will get people to use your platform, so you learn from it. Very different answers.
Very different answers. It's interesting because, again, I don't think we've ever had a conversation with somebody that talks about, because, I mean, you've worked very closely with people in C-suite, the CEO of these big companies. So they'll be kind of thinking, what I call future thinking people. They're very kind of visionary led people, I'm assuming. Not that I have experience in working with corporates, as you can tell, ladies and gents. But I suppose my question is, what, especially for our listeners right now that are kind of more founder-led small businesses, you made a very valid point. And the valid point is they're very much stuck in let's make revenue, very transactional minded. But what you're saying actually is, no. We need to think about, yes, make money in the present, but we need to think about how we make revenue in the future, whether it be through the drive of maybe technology shifts or whatever it is. For those that are kind of struggling to identify those additional revenue streams, what are maybe some of the psychological shifts that we need to overcome? Some people are just kind of living day to days. Some founder-led businesses are running around like headless chickens, and others have got a great team. And again, each business is very different, isn't it? And so many different businesses and so many different parts. What's your thoughts about that?
Well, I think you talk about a psychological shift from being small, focused on today, etc. I can guarantee you those psychological shifts are also needed in the big companies.
Okay.
I've also ran departments that are basically businesses in business, and it's so interesting that like each side thinks that the other one sees it completely different. You don't. So just like when you sit in a big company and you say, okay, what if we were tiny? What would we do? Let's dream a bit. And they're like, oh my God, thank God we got rid of bureaucracy. Then we're going to do this. And then it's like, okay, so if there was that potential, let's flip it the other way. So if I were sitting here with a founder-led smaller company, I would say, okay, well, realistically, not to oversimplify, but just for the exercise, there are three things that really move at scale. It is either if you get masses of people behind you, it is if you have a legislatory support, like space that creates a market for you, or if you have the funding. Those are, let's say, the universal scaling elements and parts of it. So therefore, I would say, okay, so if you had infinite money, what would you do? Or if you said, if you had access to every user's data, the people angle, what would you do? If you were able to put out tariffs, walls, whatever, what would you do? So just to get people thinking as if they were stronger than they are, and then once they've identified that potential, then pair it back and say, really, what would it take? What make it possible? Is it a partner that has either this data or this money or whatever it may be? Because I think one of the things that we find is that founder-led companies, by definition, of course, it's their baby. They've given birth to it. They love it. They are passionate about it. And that magic has huge runway, but it also often neglects seeing the world as it truly is. So getting quite non-emotional about some of these things and being willing to role play often helps people do that psychological shift of not saying, I'm just stuck here, but I could be in a different position.
I was listening to an audiobook the other day, and it was very much focused on not just psychological shift, but it was also focused very much on getting out of the comfort zone. We, human beings, obviously drive change, but we can only drive change if we're prepared to allow and be open to that change.
Absolutely. I can tell you, when you're in big companies, people excuse a lot of things with, oh, it's the incumbent's dilemma. We can't risk our revenue. This would be too disruptive. People would not want to do it. You don't have that in smaller companies. But what I would also say is the behavior is exactly the same.
Yes.
And I will say this year, where I've been doing all kinds of fun and indulgent things, I also took a MIT neuroscience course, and it confirmed what I've seen in so many conversations before. There's no magic to what I'm saying. Everyone knows it, but we still seem to need to be reminded. The principles of our brains of how you simply just repeat your past behavior, and to get new synaptic connections or to get neurogenesis, new thinking, new ideas, it is required to change your context or your setting.
Yes.
You can't just tell someone to change. And therefore, if you are focused only on your business, you don't step out, you don't take the time to see things from different vantage points, you won't change. No one can tell you to change. It's simply not going to happen. So this piece of, like me, what I've done is I've moved myself to keep challenging my brain and my thinking. If you are in one track and you don't want to do that, then you need to just create environments either where people come in and confront you or change the setting. and start with just saying, what are the assumptions I need to let go of? What else could be true?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, actually. And I guess you've also been in meetings in the past where there is going to be some resistance. You know, there's probably people that have been in their jobs way too long and have very quickly jumped down people's throats and said, "Oh, but this is how we do things around here. It's always done this way. Why
Yeah,
do we need to change it?" And it's kind of
yeah.
like, well, why not?
But I think it's also back to where we were before in terms of where do you want to make money and where do you want to make money in the future.
Yeah.
Because I think there's also a misunderstanding sometimes of just like chasing every opportunity.
Yes.
Be really clear. Actually, are you happy where you are? Or do you need to change? Is it a burning platform? What goal do you want to look? I think there are a lot of businesses today that have a perception that they need to just continuously grow, when actually maybe the question is, you are profitable at the level where you are now. The next level may not just automatically give you more profit. So what type of goals are you looking for? And often these goals, they may come from investors, they may come from others, but not always are they as simple as numerical. They may just be a personal, let's say, reputation, narrative, or something that one has told themselves. So I would say the largest learning from all of this is for sure that if you don't realize that any transformation starts with you changing yourself, then you are wasting your efforts.
Yep. I agree. 100%. Very good. Like that. Talk to us a little bit about, I mean, you've worked with Diageo, with Marrakesh, with Google over a 20-year career. You know, it's very extensive. What have you found in leadership mistakes that you've identified in working with all these wonderful individuals? And did you see any kind of commonality between all of the three companies? You could say, I saw this in this company. It didn't matter which the industry was in, but you saw it. But more specifically, how does that set the scene for trapping some of the founder-led businesses that are listening in today?
Yeah, I think the point is that there are common themes. However, the strengths differ significantly depending on which type of person and which type of business you are in. So I have moved from one business to the other, or worked with one customer or the other, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, you're talking about the same thing, but you're seeing it with very different eyes. And this is actually what led to let's say, the framework which I put into the book. And it basically has 4 different sections. The first one talks about visioning ambitiously. So how do you see that potential? A little bit about what we talked about before. How do you create the ability to imagine a future that doesn't exist today? And how do you enable your team to contribute to that? Being very clear, you can't define a future goal too rigidly because you don't know what's going to happen, but living in that space. So that's really about visioning. And as you can imagine, of course, I experienced that abundantly in Google. They are
Yes.
brilliant at it. They are great at seeing what it could be. But even a traditional company like Maersk, they saw the need for change. So they, I would say, are quite good at it as well, which one would not necessarily automatically
Interesting.
expect.
This episode is brought to you by KPMG. Making an impact is how KPMG helps make the difference. KPMG applies advanced tools and strategic thinking to convert data into actionable knowledge and deliver value by improving performance through transformation, modernizing processes with technology, harnessing the power of data, navigating complex M&A transactions, and enhancing trust among stakeholders. Go to kpmg.us/advisory to learn more. KPMG. Make the difference.
If you then go into the second phase, which is really about expanding. So this is where you've created that beautiful goal first in the visioning, and then you need to expand in order to make that achievable. So this is where you need to really mobilize all the collective intelligence. You need to understand who you can partner with, understand how you can stand on shoulders of others. This, I think, is really difficult for founder-led companies because, again, it's their baby. Why would I give it away? Why would I trust? And who should I contribute to here? I think this is also one of the ones that in general is hardest for most people because it requires them to accept that other people would contribute to a certain part of their proposition better than they would themselves. So definitely an area I see as a common space. If you say what's the key to it, it is being open, but it of course materializes in many different ways.
Very
The
good.
third area is steering decisively. So this, for many businesses, if you have been grown up like 30 years in traditional business, you're like, well, of course, this is what everyone has to do. You have to prioritize, you have to communicate, you have to staff for the future. You have to know how you capture the pulse of change within the organization. I can guarantee you some of the newer companies, they have not read this memo. This is where if you live in a world of abundance and continuous growth, those decisions to make sure that you have a profitable, well-oiled machine, that's not part of your DNA. And that I would say I definitely also see in people who are serial entrepreneurs. This space of decisively steering is probably something that needs practice. The last space, embodying, it is the one I firmly believe is the biggest differentiator. It is the one that you don't just move from saying, I was here and now I'm going to go there and you should follow me. This is where you as a leader step into this new space. This is where you leave behind your previous assumptions. This is where you transform into being something and someone that others want to follow. This is where some founders have shown that they can do it, but it is not, I would say, a given. But if you look at companies that have transformed over time and generated partnerships and revenue continuously, it is because they have moved behind from their past, for instance, from startup to scale up to larger size. They acknowledge that this is the phase they are in and they operate accordingly. So if I would say, I said the one I've seen most consistently problems on is the second one. 1 and 3 depends on where you came from, whether that's a disadvantage or not. Embodying, I think, is not about a industry or size or anything like that. It comes down to the individual. Are you able to actually drive that change yourself?
I love that. There's a really good framework there. So vision, expanding. What was the third one again? Sorry?
Steering.
Yep, steering. And then you've got
Embodying.
embodiment. Yeah.
And this is actually, I can tell you why the book is called Leadership Anatomy in Motion. This is the first book I've written, and I can say you learn a lot of things in that process. Writing a title, yeah, I don't think it's my strongest suit, but I'm very confident that there are some insightful learnings in that story. But the reason it is this is because fundamentally it is about having your eyes open. It is seeing further. Secondly, it is about breathing air into ideas. It is holding a space that others can step into. So if you don't use your lungs, you're never going to do that second piece. The third one on steering, it is very much like using your arms, whether it's on an airplane and saying you get off here, it is that conviction in the movement, etc. And the embodiment, it is your spine. And I think this is what people misunderstand, that they have to stand strong and be firm. But if you stand really strong, in fact, you're very easy to knock over. But if you are agile like your spine, you actually can move with change. So that is why it's called Leadership Anatomy in Motion.
We'll talk about this title offline, I think. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it, ladies and gents? And anyway, but subject to change potentially. Yeah, subject to change potentially. And by the way,
let's hear your listeners. What do they think? Once they've read the book, what should the title be? I'm very, very interested.
You know what?
That's a second edition with new headline.
That's a really good thought process. For you guys that are listening in, by the way, okay, do me a favor, head over to Amazon, type in Louisa Loran. You'll see her book, read through the synopsis and what it's about. And if you've got some suggestions for Louisa, we're all ears. Because again, this is a book for people like yourself, you know, and if it doesn't resonate, then we need to know. So help us to help Louisa. How does that sound? Good stuff. All right. But listen, I think you've made some really valid points there. You also wrote out 4 essential behaviors. Is that correct? Or is that different from the framework that we talked about?
No, those are the behaviors.
Well, they are the behaviors. So we've now got that down to a T. That's good. All right. Excellent. So in terms of I'm just thinking, you've got Markesh, very traditional business, been around for a very, very long time. You've got Google, very fast moving, very much innovative. It's all about growth. Hold on to the steering wheel and let you speed up type of thing. When you worked with the Diageo, then you went from Marrakesh, then you went to Google, which is a very different business because it's tech and it's fast moving.
Mm.
Did you start to create in your mind like a pattern or a framework that you thought, okay, well, I'm going to use this framework or I'm going to use this pattern because I've done it for the past, 10, 15 years. Did you then have to shift the way that you adapted when you worked with Google, or did that give you kind of a slightly different insight and challenge with regards to how you executed on a particular strategy role?
Yeah, well, I would say I hope I continue to learn every single day in everything I do. That is how my mind works, and I think how we get most out of the potential in the world. That said, I don't think it is a shift from one to the other. It is a continuous iteration of hypotheses.
Interesting.
I definitely believe that the biggest difference between Maersk and Maersk and Google is the, let's say, structure of decision making. In traditional companies, you have a hierarchy, and even if very empowering businesses where people contribute and are welcome to bid in, it is still that principle of we have a shared direction and everyone leads towards that and everyone contributes towards a traditional hierarchy. You then land in a business like Google, which is so much a platform business. It is built on collective intelligence. It requires everyone to take responsibility themselves and contribute to it. I will say, unfortunately, what happens in that environment is, of course, that some people, they're like, well, this is nice. No one's noticing what I'm doing. I'm just going to do nothing. Or they do things and don't hook it on a larger goal. So that's where I would say some of the scaling learnings actually apply even within a Google, because the collective intelligence surfaces the idea, but it doesn't automatically scale it. So that's where you could say the empowerment that exists in a Google world combined with the direction of a more traditional business, I think is where you get that power of scaling. And it's quite interesting when I talk to some of the companies I advise today, they're like, can you make us Google? And I'm like, well, in theory, we could talk about what it would take to make you Google, but let's talk about which parts are holding back your ability to win at that scale.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is beyond this collective intelligence versus hierarchy, it is also depending on what products you offer into the market, right? Because if you are back to what we said before of focused on scarcity, then one model may serve itself better than the other. So I do think it's not black or white. It is just being very aware that the world is subjectively seen, and the more you can see it from the other side, the more you can also understand your customers, your investor, probably also your competitors. So spending that time seeing it from the other side is always what I would do.
What I was going to say actually was different. I mean, you're experiencing working with these big corporates, different cultures, as you can imagine, very different cultures. How does your experience shape your view of what founders must do to keep their culture healthy, if you want to call it that? Because it's very much very important as part of stage 2 of exit in a business, which is all around scaling up. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think again, the culture is just a aggregation of the behaviors within the business, right? So I think the awareness of saying, do we have a culture that we believe is applicable for the next phase, yes or no? If we do, then how do we protect it through a sales process or through bringing in more people, whatever? If you don't, then let's be honest about that. For instance, I will say I once ran a smaller business within one of the larger businesses that I worked for. And I will say we have at times discussed it as a kindergarten with trust funds, because they were like, well, we just want to be a startup. We could just do whatever we want, bring dogs to the office, have whatever food we want. We don't need tables. We don't need rules. We don't need anything. But by the way, we would like you to fund us. And that was, of course, a misunderstanding of saying, well, it is a level of accountability that you have with yourself, with your family who is invested in it, or the external investors, to right size to whatever stage you at. And I do think that I have seen many smaller businesses who have struggled to keep the pureness of their purpose as they've scaled, because they have not, let's say, they have not operated at that level before, and then either an investor or advisor comes in and changes them. And it feels alien to them, it feels alien to the teams, it feels alien to the investor. Instead of going back and saying, actually, back to the whole spine part, like where should I be agile, where should I stand firm, and how do I make sure that I'm clear on which are the things that should remain part of my future, which are the things I should let go of at the next phase. So I would say for the culture, for sure, yes, but just start by with yourself. What type of leader do you want to be for that next phase?
You made a very valid point there. And for you guys that are listening in, by the way, I think that's a really good moment to just pause for a second. Okay. If you do have a notebook and pen handy, which you should have anyway, is to actually think about what Louisa has just asked you. All of our listeners are at different points in their business journey. And so if you are, especially in stage 2 of exiting your business, which is all around the scale up, is to then think about what Louisa's just asked you, is what is the type of leader that you want to be or become? And I think that's a really, really valid point. So just want to say thank you for that. I really appreciate it. One thing that kind of came to my mind, especially with a lot of our listeners, which are small business founder led, what are the 3 scaling up habits that you could instill on, say, a business that maybe have 20 employees or 50 employees, and experience and insights that you've created from the 3 companies that you've worked with? Is there anything that really kind of stands out for you?
I would though say it's probably along the same lines of what we've already talked about.
Sure.
I think the first one for sure is the what do you want to be in the future type of thing. The scale of current business model will get you to where you currently are. So think in the future, long term. Second one for sure is who holds the data that will make you continuously learn faster than anyone else. Very few small companies have access to enough data to outcompete the big guys. That does not mean that your answer is not better than the big guys. It just means they have access to more data. So think about who has that data and how can you tap into it, which then links to the third one. What is your value exchange? Not how do you make a transactional agreement with them, but what's your value exchange? How can you make sure that you are part of their equation in the future?
I think you made some really, really valid points there. You mentioned one of the frameworks that you've mentioned already. Is there anything that stands out in the book that might be applicable to maybe some of our listeners, that you feel like there was one particular section that you really enjoyed talking about, or a story or an experience that you really kind of enjoyed writing about? Was there anything from the book that really stood out for you?
Well, of course there are many, and I think what I would rather share is that I did not have a plan for many years. Like I didn't plan for a long time to write this book. I just last year decided, opened a document, and it just came out of me, because I have been super privileged to work with people that have taught me a lot of things, and I've always been curious about why do people do what they do. So the book is written in such a way as if you sit with an intimate friend who lets you in on some of these observations. So I do describe a meeting I walked into, and which was really strange, and I walked out and I reflected on why did they do what they did in that room, and what were driving their motivations. I do share stories about how I've debated with people about use of technology and what has held them back, and who they expect to come and solve it for them. So it's much more about intimate moments that have been shared there. And that's what I appreciate, that the people who read it already, they said it is like that more experienced friend that people have been missing, because we can't all learn everything, but I have been privileged to see a lot of things. And especially if you're in a smaller business, having that person who just shares their experience with you and makes you exposed to more things than you would normally do is is what I believe that is happening here. And it's quite interesting. When I was writing it in the early stages, I was debating with my editor the target audience. And we went quite back and forth on this because everyone said you have to be crystal clear on your target audience. So we actually said we have to appeal to top executives because some of these fundamentals, they have to change at the top level in order to have the full effect. And as it got written and as we read it, it was like, well, you're a top executive for your life. You make decisions about how you prioritize, whether you are a one-man band, whether you are a 10-man band, or whether you are 100,000. So actually, I have now tested it on people with companies of 3 people and students and the top executive. And it is encouraging to see that it doesn't really matter where you are, you can still learn and benefit from that experience.
What is it that you want to become?
Well, it's not so much what I want to become, it's what I want to enable.
Sure.
Firmly believe that a lot of waste is out there. And I do believe that one can achieve significantly stronger outcomes for oneself and one business if you are able to combine some of these elements. And when I say combine, I mean empathy with sharpness. I mean strategic with tactical. People are so one-sided in many ways, and they take on these roles, and that's what they do. I have made very, very difficult decisions throughout my career, but as one of my former bosses, now CEO, always said, he's like, you have the largest heart of anyone at this level, but you can cut through and you can smile at the same time, and it makes people want to follow you because this, let's say,
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Business. We could all use more time. Amazon Business offers smart business buying solutions so you can spend more time growing your business and less time doing the admin. I can see why they call it smart. Learn more at amazonbusiness.com.
De-emotionalizing, if that is even a word, of the decision, but engagement of the people. I think that is truly what drives the change. And I do believe that the more people can see that this is a way to be sharp in business and without risking oneself, then I believe actually we will see not only more business success, but a lot happier people.
It's interesting. If someone is listening to us right now, what is it that, and they kind of had in the back of their mind that you could potentially help them?
I think I can give them courage.
Courage, interesting. Is that what the audience tends to lack, is courage and confidence? Is that what you're kind of saying?
I definitely see a lot of people lacking courage. People typically, they have a lot of information. They don't know which shelf to put it in on within their brain, and therefore they often don't move on it. But I think this element of being clear on, okay, how can I see the potential? Who can help me achieve it? How do I non-emotionally prioritize, and how do I step into it? And showing that it's been done again and again and again. I have, in every single business I've operated in, we have achieved results above the industry in terms of share price, in terms of results. It is a repeatable model. And I'm not talking about me as an individual. It's about the impact that we create, right? And especially, I would say, in my last role in Google, where I was driving strategic business transformation across industries, I walked into businesses in industries I had never worked in before. But this, let's say, ability to say, remove all those worries you have in your heart. Let's get down to the core of what is the strategic problem we're trying to answer. And then from there, you decide whether you are ready and able to step into it.
Very interesting.
I would say it's actually, what I find interesting is that some of these observations, I have seen them for decades, but I probably only internalized them when I also felt them on my own body, right? It's not different from if you are being, let's say, preparing for sport or something like that, being active still, like I'm not doing anything, but I've cleared my mind. I will be ready to run or to fight or to whatever you do. Where most business leaders, they are not active still. They have chaos going on in their mind. They don't clear themselves. They don't put themselves in a position where they can make better decisions. And behaviors and frameworks like this help people do it.
I love it. Some good stuff. Yeah, it's I feel like our conversation is very thought-provoking more than anything else. And I think what I love about the conversation is that we're not giving the full answers, because that's not our role. Our role is to create curiosity, intrigue, but more importantly, to kind of set a platform where you're kind of like touching on people's actions, thoughts, and behaviors and kind of questioning it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think what's I'm also very conscious of is we're fortunate to have a broad audience here. So we talk about the how. Of course, if we were talking to a specific business or a specific industry, we would talk about the what. But the how is the same across every industry, across big, small, all kinds of different environments. And that's really what I have seen the difference. But once you get into the business, of course, you say, this is my how that enables me to be sharp on my what.
Interesting thought process. The conversation has been as thought-provoking as it has been for me. I've been writing down lots of notes. What I would highly endorse you do is to rewind this and go back, because I always find that you always pick up new stuff all the time anyway, but also it's always good to get deep insight, especially with regards to someone that's got great experience in working with some of the big global giants, because you could learn so much more. And I don't know about you, but I always used to feel like the big global giants used to have a lot more resources. That may be true, but businesses like you guys that are listening in are generally more resourceful. And there's a real big difference there. Would you agree, Louisa?
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of people who have access to resources do not use them because they don't understand the responsibility of being resourceful themselves.
There you go. Exactly. So it isn't just me that's saying it. We've got Louisa, another expert, that's saying it. So just put that into context. First of all, Louisa, thanks so much for spending a bit of time with us today. Really appreciate you.
Thank you very much. It's been fun.
Yeah,
and I really look forward to the feedback and ideas on the title.
Absolutely, 100%. And when do you expect the book to come out, by the way?
1st of October.
Okay, that's very specific. Okay, so again, depending on when you're listening to this, will depend on how quickly we can get your feedback about the book title. So don't procrastinate. Sharp. Anyway, from me and Louisa, thanks so much for being here and listening in, by the way, guys. And if this is the very first time that you've been listening in from around the world, please do me a favor, follow, subscribe this show, whether it be on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever it might be. Give us a 1 or a 5-star review. I'd greatly appreciate that. And from me and Louisa, thanks so much, and speak to you soon. Take care. Cheers.
Take care. Bye.